Hello everyone, Jerome Harris here from eProphetic.com, and will be a very short video. I was just reading in the book of Acts there at chapter 9, verse 1 and 9, where we have the Saul of Tarsus, who before becoming the Apostle Paul was breathing fire and murder, seeking towards those who belong to the way, that is, those who were disciples of Christ. And then on the road to Damascus, a brilliant light flashes around Saul, and we have Jesus telling him, why are you persecuting me? And then Jesus giving him instruction to go into a certain city to do something. Now, the reason why I bring that up is because, here we have a man who was going out, seeking to do harm and to even bring murder, perform the act of murder upon those who were disciples of Christ. And then he later on, after having this brilliant flash of light or this revelation or this event happen to him, then he changes and he becomes a follower himself. Now, I do have a problem with that because I'm not sure that's what that means, but it's like you have all these persons out there, who are doing terrible things. They're far worse, even lesser than what Saul of Tarsus was doing, murder. You got people out there stealing, cheating, and even, killing other persons, doing them harm. But yet, why aren't these persons having these revelations? Why aren't they having that same experience? Because I would think that one way to get them to turn and accept discipleship to Christ would be for them to have an experience similar to that Saul of Tarsus had. Saul of Tarsus wasn't witnessed to. No one came knocking on his door and he had a Bible study or he had some discussion with one of the disciples of Christ, and they convinced him that this is the truth or this is the way. No, Saul of Tarsus had this miraculous experience, unlike everyone else, and that's what turned him to become a disciple of Christ and an apostle, a chosen one. Now, I just saw a video not too long ago on YouTube where the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society put out an article in the September 15th, I believe it was the February 15th, 2012 Watchtower. Yes, it was the February 15, 2012 Watchtower, where it advised women in abusive relationships to take the matter to the elders in the congregation, rather than them calling the police to deal with that matter, which I feel is bad advice. It's bad advice if a woman is being abused by an abusive husband, and the organization says, continue respecting him and loving him, and then hopefully he'll come around. I mean, that's just outright bad advice. If a woman is being abused, then who is a Jehovah's Witness, for example. It can be anyone. It doesn't matter what your religious following is. But if you're being hit and abused and beaten by a human, a man, and you don't do something about that, you sit there and you take it in hopes that he'll see that you're being submissive to him, and hopefully one day he'll come around and join the religious group that you belong to, that's foolish. Because, first of all, you're not loving yourself. And if you have children in that relationship, why would you want to subject your small children to seeing you being beaten and hit and abused in front of them? What kind of impact will that have on their lives? Will the young boys in that family grow up to be just like their father, because they're seeing that their father, that's how he treats women? Come on now, you got to detach yourself away from that. You don't remain in a relationship where you're being beaten. And it's like me as an African American man. Uh, my ancestors were enslaved, and they endured some of the harshest treatment that any human being can ever endure. And this lasted even up until the 60s, where in the Deep South they were being hung from trees and lynched. Women being strapped around trees, derobed and having their breast chopped off right there in front of their children, as an example to others. Men having to watch their women raped right there in front of them to teach them a lesson, as to who's the master. You know, some things occur to others that if you can get away from it, you would get away from it. I mean, even back then, the slaves, saw the treatment that they were undergoing, and so they tried to run away. That's a natural thing to get away from abuse. And so if you women out there who are in these relationships, especially if you are a Jehovah's Witness or of any religious group, but in this discussion, I'm referring to that article that the Watchtower put out. If the advice that they're giving you is to take the matter to the elders, what are the elders going to do? They're going to tell you, oh, just hang in there, be submissive to him because he'll, perhaps your good example and treating him kindly will turn him around. No, that's like saying that a slave master is going to, if you respect a slave master, back in the days of slavery in this country, the United States, you continue being submissive to a slave master. You're being fine with him raping your women and putting stripes on your back with a harsh whip. You continue being submissive to that, and perhaps somehow he'll have a change of heart. Are you kidding me? That's just bad advice, and it's not loving. The fault here is not you, not fully. You do bear responsibility, especially if you remain in that relationship. If you remain in that relationship and allow yourself to be abused like that, then I say shame on you too, because you're not loving yourself. You should try to do all you can to get away from that and to seek help. I am a former Jehovah's Witness, and I dissociated myself from the organization about 3 years ago. And I was more than 20 years active within the organization, a faithful witness. It came as a shock to many hearing it today that I disassociated myself from the organization. I wasn't disfellowship. I disassociated myself from the organization. And many today hearing it become shocked. But the thing is, I know that the organization perhaps thinks that the advice that it's giving you is good advice. That's not good advice. I've seen information passed down from the governing body that applied to the brothers and sisters in one country, for example in Greece, but didn't apply to a country, say, in Latin America. For example, decisions were made concerning those brothers in Greece to serve alternate military duty in Greece, just to get them out of doing something, you see. But those brothers, there suffered for it. But yet that same rule didn't apply to those down in Latin America. In fact, down in Latin America, those brothers were actually bribing the police, to get things, and it was endorsed by the organization. So it's like sometimes decisions comes down from the organization that just makes no sense. And plus, those brothers up there on the governing body, they're just out of touch with the real world. Many of them have never held a full-time job, don't know what it's like to raise a family because their life has been devoted to what they're doing right now. So, and they're all white men with the exception of the recently added Samuel Hurd, who himself really should not be one of the anointed according to Watchtower Reckoning. Because Watchtower Reckoning says that 1933 was the cutoff date, that anyone born after that date cannot possibly be of the anointed, but yet Samuel Hurd was born after that date. But Samuel Hurd is an African American. But the point I was making is that a lot of those men up there just don't know what it's like to live in the real world, like you and I, who have to work every day and to raise a family. They're pampered. What they have is given to them. And if the makeup, the racial makeup of that body are 10 or so white men, then what do they know about being African American or African or Asian or of any group who's suffered abuses at the hands of people of other racial groups? They have no appreciation for that. They don't know what it's like to even be a woman because they're all men up there. What I'm saying is there's just no sensitivity. So those of you who are being abused, you hold a primary responsibility for yourself, to love yourself. And what I was saying before, what I started this video about in the first place, was here we have Saul of Tarsus having this miraculous experience. Why don't that abusive husband who was beating his wife and abusing her, why don't the Lord give him that kind of experience? Wake him up so he'll stop doing what he's doing. What made what made Saul of Tarsus so special? And here you have this poor woman these women being beaten and bruised up and hurt and in some cases murdered by these men who can't control themselves. You see? So that is sad. And I'm not saying that one should not believe in the Most High God, because I do with all my heart. And I view Christ as my head and master. I just think that these religious organizations, Watchtower Bible Tract Society included, takes things out of Scripture and they twist them the way they want them to read. And and to advise women to continue to be submissive to their husbands doesn't mean that you're supposed to let them abuse you. You can still be submissive to your husbands by protecting yourself. Get away from him and then be submissive to him, remotely, long distance. But you don't let him hurt you or your children. You protect yourself. Turning the other cheek doesn't mean that you're supposed to just, not protect yourself. You can take, I can walk down the street and have a person call me about the N-word. I can take that. I can let that roll off of me. But if a person raises their hand to do me harm, and if I have the power to stop it, I'm going to stop it. That doesn't mean I'm going to go on the offensive and do the person harm unless I have to. Now, I'm going to protect myself. That's being defensive. That's not being offensive. But if the person continues to do me abuse, then there comes a point where you have to say, I love myself. And I have people here responsible for me, young people, my children. If I allow this person to abuse me and hurt me, who's going to be around to take care of them? You see, so you got to think about that. You've got to protect yourself. You first take a defensive posture, and then when things start progressing worse, then either you have to do something to hurt him. I'm not saying kill him, but to hurt him to where he can't hurt you, or do something to get yourself up out of that situation, to run away, to get your children, get yourself out of that. Go. Family member or friend, but don't stay there. Because the organization says, stay in that relationship. Terrible, terrible advice. Shame on you, Bible and Tract Society, for putting out that kind of an article where you're advising these women to stay in these abusive relationships for the sake of them becoming one of you. Are you that narrow-minded where you would subject those within your organization to that kind of abuse for the sake of one person coming into the truth, what you call the truth, 17 years later? What kind of love are you expressing toward that sister that you gave that advice to, these women you're giving this advice to? That's terrible advice. You would think that what you would say is that, love yourself, and what can we do to help you, to shield you from that? Provide that woman shelter someplace. Provide her financial assistance or a means to get away from it. You can't be that cheap. You're building up these expensive looking kingdom halls all over the country. And I'm saying within the United States and the more wealthy lands, but in those lands where they're poor, and I lived in one as a witness, I don't see that occurring over there. I lived in Africa for many years. I'm not seeing you put up these expensive carpet, air-conditioned kingdom halls in those lands. They're shacks for the most part. So you have money. the organization is rolling in it, and you're that stingy where you see those within the organization suffering, and you won't lift a hand to help them. I mean, even in Scripture, just to paraphrase what's read in Scripture there, if you see a man or a person who's hungry, you don't go up to them and say, hey, go find yourself something to eat. If you see a person who is cold, out in the elements there, you don't say to the person, go find yourself a coat. You give the person something to eat. You give the person a coat. In other words, you lend them assistance. But what you don't do, and I know the organization because I was a part of you for more than 20 years, you don't lend assistance. You have a very tight purse string, and you're more concerned about real estate and the maintenance of that real estate, making your kingdom halls look good and trimmed. You're concerned with the outward appearance, the image of the organization, than you are with the people who are within it, who are suffering real problems every day, with unemployment, with single mothers, with abusive women. You don't lift a hand to help them. Instead of, you give them lip service and you give them this kind of bad advice. And I say to you, shame on you. And if for those of you who are within our organization who don't see this, what is wrong with you? I know what's wrong with you. The organization already has this. That's the first thing that it takes away from you. It strips away your ability to think. It makes you think that if you don't go along with the program, that somehow you're being disloyal to Jehovah and his son. That's what they tell you. If you disobey the organization, then that's the same thing as disobeying Jehovah and his son. No, it's not. See, that's their way of controlling you and making you afraid to think for yourself and taking action. So if the organization tells you, just continue with this abusive relationship, in hopes that he come around, you know what? You might be dead and your children motherless or parentless because of this bad advice. And then I think about the women who have actually gone through, who are witnesses, who have gone through these kinds of abusive relationships, and they read an article like that. I'm like, they've got to be livid. See, because the men who throw these things out from the governing body down to the congregation, see, they haven't dealt with that. But the women who are reading these articles, they're getting flashbacks that they have either gone through an abusive relationship or they're in one. And when they read that article, they are saying, "Are you kidding me? You're telling me to continue with this man?" And that's the key phrase. You're telling me this. The Most High God, Jehovah, and his son, they're not telling you that. Get an organization directing you and telling you what to do. That's just not common sense. And I'm going to end the video because there's one other thing I want you to think about, because this sort of parallels that. I remember that when I was a witness, I was in door-to-door all the time, placing magazines and talking to householders. And I was very good at it. And I was sincere about what I was doing. I remember an elder getting up on the podium one Sunday, basically counseling the congregation that, that when you go out to the door, out in field service, and you're talking to the householder, and they start speaking abusively to you, smile at them. I'm like, wait a minute, smile at them? Is that a natural thing? I remember I worked in performed field service in one of the southeastern states, South Carolina. And I remember going out in field service one Sunday morning and out in this rural area, really country area, redneck country area, and come upon this house, and this man saw me and the guy with me go up on his porch, and we identified ourselves as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and I can see into his house because there's a screen door there, and he had a shotgun in his hand, and he said, "Get off my porch or I am going to shoot you." Well, that's all I need to hear. I start backing away and going, but the guy with me was still trying to get this man to accept a publication and to hear what he had to say. I'm like saying, this man has a gun. And it's not common sense for you to stand here and be talking to him because, he's serious. He says get off his porch, and we should respect that. And so the point I'm making here is sometimes people become so zealous in placing a magazine or listening to what the Watchtower says that you're supposed to be doing, that you don't exercise common sense. And in this case, man's got a gun, and he says get off his porch, get off his porch. That's serious. See, that was a threat. And likewise, if women sit there and let these women abuse them without doing something about it, see, you're not exercising common sense. You see, there's something within you says to get away from that. But yet, if you're being indoctrinated to have that common sense element removed from you, then you're not going to act with the common sense. You're going to be acting out of fear because the organization says you're supposed to continue in that relationship, and somehow you feel that if you don't listen to what they tell you to do, that you're somehow letting the organization down, you're letting your brothers and sisters down, you're letting Jehovah down, you're letting the Christ down. No, you're letting yourself down. And get away from that. You approach your Most High God in prayer, and he'll help you. But first, remove yourself from that. Okay, our Jerome Harris, coming down off that pedestal. I'm sorry. Have a good day.